Thomas purchased his iPad last year and has used it to listen to the radio, surf the web, and not much else. This speech was a great opportunity to discover new apps to make this nifty little device more useful. Thomas will now use the iPad to take us on a journey, his pilgrimage to Mecca. Thomas, thank you.
My pilgrimage to Mecca obviously is not really to Mecca. The first step of my pilgrimage started in Independence, Missouri. I worked for Sprint, which was headquartered in Kansas City, Kansas. I had a weekend day available, so I went to, well, there it is. I didn't even need to do that. I went to the Truman Museum, which is in Independence, Missouri. Get comfortable using this. And one of the interesting things about the Truman Museum is in the auditorium is where the Medicare law was signed into law in the 1960s by President Johnson. Believe it or not, President Truman was a retired president, did not have health insurance.
Oh, wow.
So at the signing, he actually received Medicare card number 1, and Bess received Medicare card number 2. Also, you can see his house as part of the package to see the museum and the archives, library. It's a very interesting house. It was really just a farmhouse that had gotten bigger and bigger over the years. Now, they were very plain people, so as you're going through the house, you pass through the kitchen on your way out, and on the wall is a calendar from a local drugstore, like we used to see back in the 50s and the 60s, and there was an X on every day up until the day that Bess died. And they actually left the calendar there just to show what kind of ordinary people they were. The next step of my pilgrimage to Mecca is in Yorba Linda, California. And this was in the 2000s, and this was for the Nixon Museum. Now notice this was the Nixon Museum, not the Nixon Library at the time. Nixon had some issues. And part of those issues involved the Watergate records. And at that point, those records were not here at a public library. So this was not part of the National Archives when I went to it. It is now part of the National Archives because the statute of limitations has run on some of those records. So it now is the museum and the archives as well. This looks kind of like a mausoleum. At least this picture does, I was thinking, but it is Nixon we're talking about. Also part of it, sorry these pictures are so small, this is the house where he was born because the site in Yorba Linda is his homestead, if you will. Very nice little house. This is actually one of those Sears type houses, the craftsman house that you would build out of a kit that you would order from Sears. A cute little house. Also on the website, you remember this picture? This is when he resigned and he was leaving in the helicopter. The website I was looking at to get these pictures said, and you can go into the helicopter and everything's awesome. And I'm like, I was there in the 2000s. I would have loved to have gone in this helicopter. I would have remembered that. So actually this helicopter didn't get there until about a couple of years ago. But that would be a fun thing to do. If you like history, presidential museums are really great. Anyway, so now the helicopter's there, but I didn't get to see that. Oh, by the way, we were visiting friends in California, only about 10 miles from Yorba Linda. So I said to the family, we're going to the Nixon Library. And the response was,
no, we're not.
Not quite. The response was crickets, white noise. However, my daughter was only about 10 years old, so she was drafted, and she did go into the Nixon Museum. Now, I didn't get to see the helicopter because it wasn't there yet, but I did see this. Any idea what that might be? And that's too small. This is a piece of the Berlin Wall.
Oh.
So this is a piece of the Berlin Wall. You can't touch it, but you can look at it, which is very interesting. He was very involved with the Cold War and the Soviets and things like that. My next step on the pilgrimage was to Hyde Park, New York. And we were on a trip. My wife was going to the US Open for tennis. The last thing I wanted to do was go the U.S. Open. Anyway, so she went to the U.S. Open, and it was really cool. So I took a train ride from Grand Central Station to Hyde Park, right along the Hudson River. Beautiful once you get outside the city up there. And we went to Hyde Park, and this is a picture of his presidential museum and library. Now, this was actually the first presidential library. He was the first president to have a library, and the only one that was actually used by a sitting president. So this was actually completed by the time he was president, so he actually used this library himself. The only time that library has been used by a sitting president. Usually it's completed after they've completed office, but he was in office so long that he had time to use his own library. Right next door to his museum and library is his house in Hyde Park. You can go to the house, it's very interesting. And this is a picture of a wheelchair and braces. Because if you remember, he had polio. Well, the American people didn't know he had polio. They may have known it, but they certainly didn't see him in a vulnerable situation. Whenever he went to the podium, he was escorted and basically leaned himself upon the podium. He was not seen vulnerable. He was always seated or propped up or whatever. He had very strong arms. He really did, because he propped himself up all the time, but very weak legs. So a lot of humanity that you can see when you go to these museums. Also, next door is one of the many Vanderbilt museums. Vanderbilt's built the railroads, and they were mega rich. They probably would have liked the estate tax as well until it came time to write a check. And then, like I'm saying, taxes, I told Jeremy, taxes are great when other people pay them. So the Vanderbilts would have paid a lot of tax. They were multimillionaires. Beautiful, beautiful place, again, right on the Hudson River, very scenic. The last one that I went to was about 2 years ago in Boston, and it's the JFK Museum. Very modern place, really, really nice place. And basically, if you like the 60s were a long time ago. The 60s were a long time ago. The 60s were a long time. Okay, sorry, young people. Anyway, if you like the 60s, you would love this museum. Okay, so this is just a memorabilia from the 60s. And of course, I took this picture, and this says, "Love those Democrats." Well, if you know me, you know I don't love those Democrats. But it's just a very groovy pin. I put this on Facebook. Many of my friends were very concerned. They thought I was going over to the dark side. And I said, no, it's okay. It's just a groovy pin. There's also a lot of stuff about Jackie Kennedy as well. Mecca, though, is Simi Valley for Reagan. Beautiful, beautiful. You can go on Air Force One, which is probably the best thing. And that is my Mecca. Thank you so much.